So I came across a really interesting article today talking about how there is growth in the Presbyterian Church in America, otherwise known as the PCA. And what I kind of found interesting about this is if you look at a lot of recent studies, majority of other evangelical churches, especially what we notice in the Southern Baptist Convention, seems to be doing the exact opposite. They seem to be declining in memberships, but yet once again the PCA is increasing. And I want to go ahead and use this article and bring this about to kind of talk about this because this is interesting, and I think it kind of points to something like some different data and statistics kind of pointing to where we see Christianity, especially in America, kind of going, and what people as the generations move on and on look at. So let's go ahead and jump over to the article that did spark this interest. And that's going to be an article that came from the Christian Post. And it was titled Presbyterian Church in America Sees Growth in Baptisms and Giving in 2024 Amid Nationwide Declines. And this is actually packed with data. We'll briefly read over this and then kind of dive into it. But if you are, by the way, we are live. So if you are watching this live, highly encourage you to comment. And if you are watching this in the future, highly encourage you to drop your thoughts and comments in as well, as those do matter. Also, the show is called IBNW News. We talk about news from that Christian standpoint, just thinking about all things biblically, whether that's to do with church, culture, whatever the case may be. If you do enjoy it here, highly encourage you, like, share, subscribe. It really does help out and push this message. So let's go ahead and read this up a little bit. So the Presbyterian Church in America saw widespread growth in 2024 with a notable increase in membership, giving, and professions of faith, according to the denomination's latest 5-year statistical summary published by the Administrative Committee. Of the 1,667 congregations in the PCA, 992 submitted statistical data revealing a 1.84% increase in total membership over the previous year, bringing the total now a little over 400,000, up from what was around 390,000 in 2023. According to By Faith Online, the official magazine of the PCA. This marks the third consecutive year of membership growth for the denomination. And once again, this is contrasting that the SBC has seen the exact opposite. While the SBC has seen an increased number of baptisms uh, and confessions, they have not seen a growth when it comes to membership. And there's a multitude of reasons for that, and that's what we're going to kind of dive in as we go into this. But let's just go ahead and kind of talk about some of these key points, and we'll keep jumping back to the article as it goes on. So, what I put here in my notes, the Presbyterian Church in America has seen modest growth while the SBC is experiencing decline. And there are several key factors here that have to do with this. Number one, I think people are seeing the difference when it comes to doctrinal clarity and confessional identity. What does that mean? So the PCA, if you did not know, they are unapologetically reformed, confessional, and elder-led with a clear adherence to the Westminster Confession of Faith. While Southern Baptist churches, for the most part, are not going to be confessional. They don't hold to one strict type of theology. Rather, they are kind of a mixed bag. I mean, I feel like I can talk about this because I'm technically a part of the SBC. So, I mean, hence, wrong side, hence the shirt I'm wearing right now. If you didn't know, if you're first time watcher here, I'm in the military, so I have to move around a lot. So I'm not necessarily a denomination person. Rather, I go to the best church that see locally in the area whenever I have to move every 2 to 3 years. With that being said and out of the way, the SBC is kind of a mixed bag. You're going to get some solid churches. You're going to get some flimsy churches. You're going to get some very much traditional churches, and you're going to get some we're not your typical church type church in there. It's a mixed bag. You have no idea what you're getting when it comes to the SBC. And I think people are kind of seeing clarity and attractiveness when it comes to a church that knows its identity. They know exactly what they preach, whether you agree with it or not. There is a level of attractiveness. You know what you're going to get when you walk into a PCA church for the most part, as opposed to an SBC church. Once again, that's going to be a very, very mixed bag. So we've noticed that there's some studies out there saying that the strong theological foundation appeals to younger evangelicals seeking depth, order, and historical rootedness, especially those delusioned with broader evangelical trends. So that's was something that was interesting. And we talked about this in earlier episodes, how we saw the younger generation of Christians kind of moving to a more traditional. I listened to a really awesome podcast. I was talking about how they have studies finding out that there is much more in the younger generations that are wanting to go to a more traditional based church, not necessarily depending on a certain denomination, but so much in the fact that they find something more authentic when it comes to a church that has, pews and a pulpit and a traditional church building, as opposed to what we really saw blow up in the seeker sensitive movement with these very modern buildings, very business model, things of that nature. People are seeing a type of genuineness inside of that. And that's one of the reasons why. Other reasons are the perceived drift that is happening and division within the SBC. And I don't even think you could say it's perceived, because I do think it is real and it's there. The SBC, if you didn't know, has faced multiple internal conflicts over issues such as race, politics, gender roles, and also how to engage the culture of today. Accusations of both liberal left drifting and hyper fundamentalism on the other side have fractured trust among members and potential church going people. Not to mention, you also have multiple high profile controversies such as the essay scandals, political alignment, Christian nationalism. All these things kind of damaging the SBC's overall public witness. I want to go over to a couple comments here that people are talking about. Jonathan Lumford sarcastic says, which of the 10 PCA churches are you talking about? Well, there's over 1,000 of them. So there are there are a lot of PCA churches out there. Too Legit chimes in, 19 go, therefore make disciples. Oh, yep. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Of course, citing Matthew 28. Great passage right there. So let's go ahead and keep kind of talking over. So what are some other things? So we talked about basically the doctrinal clarity, the confessional identity, as some people, younger people, are finding that attractive, basically defining who you are and what your identity is. Not to mention, once again, all the different controversies that the SBC has. I put here number 3, the PCA actually has a different type of church planting and urban strategy that they didn't have before. This gets a little bit into schematics, but the PCA affiliated groups such as Mission to North America and Redeemer City, they focused on urban church planting, reaching educated professionals and younger families. This contrast with the SBC, which historically has been really strongly rooted mostly in southern areas, and the context is that we're seeing a lot of population decline in the areas where the SBC was, and I can attest to that. I remember when I was living down in Louisiana, I went to an SBC church for a small period in time there, and that church was basically your typical small church. It had about 20 people. It was a great church. I loved it. I'm not talking any type of smack about it, but basically there were no new members coming into that church. The remaining members that were there, sadly, they either people were slowly dying out, literally, and no new people were coming in. This seems to be a trend that we see among some Southern Baptist congregations. We also see Too Legit chimed in. We talked about this in a previous episode. It said also an increase in attention paid to the Eastern Orthodox Church as well as the Roman Catholic Church as well. And that is true. I'm not really talking too much about that in this episode, but that is true that there is an attraction towards in the younger generation. I think it goes back to that first point that I made, that the younger generation seems to be seeking something that actually knows its identity, whether you agree with it or not. Like I would disagree greatly with the Roman Catholic Church. I definitely more so agree with the PCA, but a denomination that actually defines itself, you know exactly what you're getting when you walk in there. I think that it finds appeal to some people as opposed to your standard non-denominational church, and you have no idea what they're talking about. And it takes a long time because usually they'll have a very generic, what we believe section and things of that nature on the website of their church. Jonathan Lunsford said, is there an evangelical Presbyterian denomination? Yes, the PCA is an evangelical denomination. Don't confuse that with the PCUSA, which is a mainline denomination. So PCA, Presbyterian Church in America, is evangelical, while PCUSA, that's the much more liberal, left-leaning one, and I'm moving to the right on my screen when I say that. I don't know why. That is known as a mainline denomination. Kathy chimed in. She said, I went to one talking about a PCA church that was very traditional and one contemporary light, not the loud band and the light show. Yeah, that's another reason why some people may be enjoying it. Once again, it goes back to that more traditional style. Like when you're going to church, you're going to church. It's not so much of a rock concert. And some people may be finding that attractive. Once again, I think going back to that authenticity standpoint. And I'm not trying to sway people's opinions, by the way, in this one way or another. I just thought this was interesting, worth talking about. So I definitely let your comments be known. I'm not trying to shift you on one way or another, but I think it's something that we as Christians can examine and see, hey, what's kind of going on over here? Jonathan Lunsford said there is a charismatic movement rolling through the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. I've heard about the Roman Catholic one. I haven't heard about the Orthodox one. One of my chaplains in my battalion in the Army is in a Greek Orthodox. And it's been interesting because I never really studied too much into Greek Orthodoxy, but just having random conversations with him. If you've ever been in the military and you know what it's like talking to chaplains, so you're going to get a mixed bag depending on what denomination they are a part of. So another thing is we see, and this was honestly a trend that was starting in the early 2000s. I think this has kind of died out now, but this may be the residual effects of the parents now of this generation. If you all remember back in the early 2000s up to the 2010s, we had the young, restless, and reform movement that was going on, and a lot of younger crowds were being drawn towards reform theology. I think that's kind of died out now, honestly. I don't think that's nearly as prevalent, but one of the connections you can kind of see is those people could be having kids now, and they could have been pushing their kids or training up their kids is a better way to kind of put it in those different theological issues. Loving the comments. I'm hearing people come in. Kathy says we have a PCA seminary here in St. Louis called Covenant Seminary. Jonathan Lunsford says, I'd love to have a chat with that dude talking about the Greek Orthodox chaplain. Yeah, it's very interesting conversations. The guy actually has the entire Bible memorized in Greek. Not lying. He has a photographic memory. It's pretty crazy when you talk to him. Great conversations, though, to be had. Really awesome. Iron sharpens iron. Other things that we're kind of seeing is the higher retention and leadership within the PCA. Now, this is definitely something different. If you've known what we've talked about on this channel, a lot of mega churches, some of those have been Southern Baptist Convention churches where there's a lot of leadership turnover. People are leaving left and right, things of that nature. But at the end of the day, you can't say that, from what I've seen in my experiences of traveling across this country, going from church to church to church, I definitely see the PCA holds their leadership much longer than you would see in a typical Southern Baptist Convention church. That's a generality. That is not a rule. I'm not saying that's everywhere. That's just a generality that I've observed over 20 years of traveling this country. I think some reasons on that is the PCA emphasizes theological education much, much more than the SBC does. And they also have programs within the PCA for long-term elder training, which I think, in my opinion, leads to more stable leadership pipelines. Meanwhile, in the SBC, once again, it is very varied. It's a very mixed bag. You have some that do require a lot of theological training. Then you have others that, really don't care. No lie, I was invited one time to preach at an SBC church when I was living in Louisiana. They had no idea who I was. They never talked with me. They never had a conversation with me. They saw I had a bumper sticker on my car that said "Hooked on Jesus" because I like to fish, and it said "Hooked on Jesus," and they were like, "Oh, that's cool." And I'm like, "Yeah, when I get out of the military, I'd like to be a pastor." We got into that conversation. Like, "Do you preach?" And I'm like, I have from time to time. Would you like to preach at our church?" I'm like, "Whoa!" Like, that just goes to show you an example of some SBC churches, not all. That is not the norm. That's not the majority, but it's a very mixed bag. Meanwhile, in the PCA, you are never going to see that. They take the preaching and the teaching and being a minister, a pastor of the word very, very seriously. And they won't let you do that unless you've once again had that long-term education and that long-term elder training being raised up within that congregation and in the word. That was some of the differences that I've kind of noticed over time. So, just to kind of break it down a little bit more on what we talked about. So, here's some factors. One, once again, theological identity. The PCA, they're very clear, they're confessional, and they're reformed, meaning they're, and whether you agree with reformed theology or confessions, I'm not here to debate that with you. What I am saying is they are very definitive on what they believe. They say, here you go, this is exactly what we believe. Meanwhile, SBC, mixed bag, very broad, sometimes divided. You never know what you're going to get. It's like reaching your hand into a bag of M&Ms. Pick which color you're going to get. You don't know. Another one, once again, growth focus. The SBC is focused a lot more on broader missions, which is a good thing. I think the International Mission Board is a good thing. The North American Mission Board is a good thing overall. I know there's some controversies intertwined in there. I haven't dug into them enough. But from what I've talked to, I've known people who are missionaries through the International Mission Board. Everything seems to be pretty solid on there. But it seems like the PCA, at least in America, is focused a lot more when it came to, and obviously the SBC does this in greater numbers, but we're talking percentages over here. It seems like the PCA is doing a lot more church planting and going into areas that seem to not be reached within the United States. Another one is that cultural perception that we talked about. We've hit on it, PCA being much more stable, less politically entangled. They don't have a lot of, the Christian nationalism tag that kind of gets draped on a lot of SBC churches, sometimes unfairly. Meanwhile, the SBC can be very politically polarizing, and they are filled with a lot of scandals. Not to mention, once again, generational appeal. We see a lot of more educated and younger Christians moving to that more traditional, especially in the PCA, while the SBC seems to be declining a lot more in the younger demographics. At least the numbers would point out that way. And here's just some stats to go ahead and back that up, because I don't want to just, kind of speak out of my behind on this, for lack of better terms. So the SBC, Southern Baptist Convention, has experienced a consistent decline in membership over the past 17 years. 2023, the membership fell by over 241,000, bringing the total to approximately 12.98 million, the lowest that they've ever seen since the mid 1970s. And once again, this is part of a broader trend, with the denomination losing over 3 million members since its peak in 2006. We've gone over the different controversies that really caused this. But meanwhile, once again, the PCA is seeing growth, especially in urban areas and amongst the younger generation. So with all that being said, I just thought this was a very interesting article, an interesting read, seeing something a little bit different. For those of you who may be new, we don't go over just, the buzzworthy, clickable news that you may see about certain church leaders, although that often does take up a majority of our time. We like to report on all the different news that goes on Christianity, and we try to hit as many topics as we can. So if you're curious at all, this article, once again, can be found on the Christian Post. And hey, this is going to be a shorter one, but I hope y'all have a wonderful night. I hope y'all have a great week, and we will see y'all on the next.